we will go ahead and get started. I want to say it's been a minute since I have been here, so it's great to be back, and it's great to see all the familiar names on the participant list. So thank you all for joining us this morning. First, I want to give a special thanks to our anchors, WorkSource Georgia, um, DHS, WorkSource Metro Atlanta, Goodwill, Metro Atlanta Chamber, BDI, CareerRise, Ferrovial, First Step Staffing, and Google, which I think is our newest addition to the anchors. So thank you for your support and making the work of Max possible through your support. This morning we have a great program. I guess from back in my day, I'm excited to hear from both Tim Cairl, Vice President of Talent Development at Metro Atlanta Chamber, and Daniela Perry, Executive Director at the Georgia Chamber Foundation. They'll provide a recap of the 2026 Georgia legislative session, and then feel free to use the Q&A function or the chat function if you have any questions. I'll be keeping an eye out for all of those, and then we'll have at the end, I'll review everything. But with that, I will turn it over to Tim and Daniela.
Good morning, everybody. Good to be with you all again. And hey, Daniela. Um,
And
so, so I thought what I would do, Daniela, I've got kind of like a list of the legislation that we were following, and it's pretty big because it covers our whole team. For those of you who don't know, pretty similar to the Georgia Chamber, Metro Atlanta Chamber, big business association. Our primary focus is around economic development, and of course, talent and workforce plays a huge part of that. I've been at the chamber a little over 12 years now, working mostly in education and workforce policy. And I know Daniela, probably everyone knows you here, but do you want to introduce yourself too?
yeah, thanks, Tim. Daniela Perry, Executive Director of the Georgia Chamber Foundation. So obviously the Georgia Chamber is the state's largest business advocacy organization. And my team really focuses on the long-term policy development, but work hand in glove with our government affairs team who really obviously thinks about the legislation and how do we deliver on those public policy objectives through legislation. So work very closely. We have our Government Affairs Council, which is a group of 450 corporate and contract lobbyists, of course, and the Metro Atlanta Chamber is involved with that, as along with a number of our other partners around the state, from local chambers, businesses, and other associations. So we really have a united front down at the Capitol from a business perspective, which I think is invaluable to making sure that we communicate a singular message, especially on workforce issues, which we all have so much alignment on.
Truth in that. So I'm going to go ahead and share. There we go. Now they popped up. Okay. Woohoo. All right. So I'm going to focus in first on the sort of big issues that were flying around regarding education workforce areas. The budget, as many of you know, dominates a lot of education and workforce policy work at the state level. So interestingly, even though it was a very strange year to be at the Capitol with a lot of folks running for higher office or retiring, um, there were either pretty, what do you call it, status quo items with the budget, or good movements with the budget, and only kind of one sort of pullback, and it was a small one in the big scheme of things. So I want to talk about the things that either stayed the same or moved ahead. CAPS, which is the Child and Parent Services program, the state's subsidy for childcare in the state for low-income working parents, that remained pretty close to the same, as did computer science grants for local school districts, our college completion grant. One of the new things was funding for the Career Navigator system. So this is an effort the governor announced last year at the Workforce Summit and will be housed in what was formerly called the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. And we'll get more into that in a second. There will be some expansion of express lanes around I-75. I put this one in here because anybody who's driven 75 South knows the sort of 216, 218 area of I-75 very well. So they'll be adding some express lanes through that stretch of I-75. So that was a little bit of personal privilege throwing that one in. The Georgia Research Alliance did get a little bit of additional funding, which is always good to see as our state relies on a lot of that combined university research effort to compete with some of the other regions and states that also compete for these large research projects. The one minor pullback was for the university system. There was, I think, around $35 million that was pulled back for some of the online efforts that the university system has been doing. So that was one hit to that system. Of course, with budgets as tight as they are, trying to keep tuition and fees in control, we're always very wary whenever there's any type of reduction in the university's budget. And then a little
I'll
bit of,
add in there.
sorry, go ahead.
I know that we were kind of particularly watching that piece just because a lot of our universities that are outside of the Atlanta area are kind of impacted more so. So
Yep.
think about your Valdosta states and other folks. So from a statewide perspective, we were really interested in that piece. But I think too, Chairman Burns mentioned a study committee potentially this off season to talk about post-secondary funding. So just wanted to note that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's really good. I think just from what I know from university partners coming out of the pandemic when everybody was forced online, they saw that there was an opportunity, particularly for some of the more rural-based students or students with very hectic schedules, that there were conversions to online for courses that made sense. So I'm glad that the university system is still doing that work. I think it's really important for folks who, especially folks that either have children, are driving long distance, or need to work while they're going to school, to have those online options. So, and then one other personal point of privilege I'll do, since we house the Atlanta Sports Council, there was funding for the Super Bowl, primarily geared around public safety for that. That's coming up in 2028. So that was also a much needed appropriation to get ready for that big event. Everybody's thinking FIFA, but we're actually 2 years from hosting the next Super Bowl, which is also a large amount of folks coming into the metro area. So I will do that. So I thought, Daniela, we would just kind of play the hits here and go through some of the big pieces of legislation. This is not all encompassing. This was just some of the things that we were tracking. Some of these were ones left over from last year that we weren't really sure if they were going to move, and did. So it was a very good thing. And some of them were new and were really important to the leadership on both sides of the General Assembly. So we'll talk about the big one first, and that was House Bill 1302. This was the governor's bill. The Education and Workforce Strategy Act was the official name of it. This was carried by Matthew Gamble in the House. For those of you who've been around career and tech and a lot of the career-focused efforts with K-12, Representative Gamble is probably not a new name to you. He's been very involved in this, so it was exciting to watch him carry this legislation through. One of the big changes they made was not the elimination, but the rebranding, I would say, and slight expansion for the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, now called the Governor's Office of Education and Workforce Strategy. And the reason why that redesignation, I think, just to make it make the name change understandable, like why would they change the name to Education Workforce Strategy? The top state for talent efforts, which we talked a lot about last year. So that includes things like the high demand career list. It includes a lot of the data collection and aggregation portions for all the different agencies that house education data, as well as the state workforce board will be moving to this new office. So it's a lot of administrative change and a lot of data designation change. But the one thing that I see as really nice to this is it's pulling everything to a central point. So we know where to go if we have questions about things that are related to data and related to some of the work source efforts. Not that we didn't know that with TCSG before, but it does put the two things together into one office. Daniela, if you want to jump in, go for it.
Yeah, I'll just add too. I know on the apprenticeship side, that was a huge piece. I think especially we've seen the significant benefits that experiential learning opportunities have on career readiness for students. Of course, having that financial for businesses is really important. And I think especially if we're thinking about like reskilling folks, being able to continue to pay them a salary while they're getting additional training and advancing and remaining employed is extremely important. So I think the opportunity to really kind of upgrade and and double down on the apprenticeship piece is super important. And I think too, having that again in that central repository and with a lot more controls at the state level than the federal level is going to be extremely important to help grow this and make sure we've got some new folks. The governor's put some money in the budget previous years around apprenticeships. She says she's done a great job with those programs, but it's just really important. And I will say from a Georgia Chamber perspective, we a few bills that we will always designate as scorecard bills. So they really rise to the importance of the business community. And this was one of those for us. So at the end of a 2-year biennium, provide every legislator with a grade, depending on how business friendly they were. And it's based on if they vote with us on these kinds of bills. So this was one, actually, a lot of these bills are on there, which is super exciting. And I think it shows the alignment between our organizations and the board and also the awards perspective. So really excited to see this continue to move forward. This really was the big highlight of the session.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree with all of that. For some of the next ones, particularly like HB 1413, I put a bill up there, the SB 556 in red and green, because it became the all-encompassing Christmas tree bill towards the end of session. So those of you who have been around session before, you know that what happens is a lot of times bills that either didn't pass one chamber before crossover day or did pass but aren't really moving and time gets really crunched, particularly in the last couple of days, they will combine a lot of bills into one single bill just for consolidation and to rather than have to vote on 6 or 7 different bills, they might vote on one. So SB 556 became that this year and included things like the needs-based aid scholarship or the DREAM Act, which would be, I think, a first for Georgia to have that into place. Still, details are still TBD on a lot of how that's going to be enacted or administered, but just really glad they got this on the books. There are a few $100 million already appropriated for that. So very excited to see that happen. But hopefully we probably might even think about doing a follow-up for this once the sort of regs are all done and we know how this works. I think it'll be a very important piece for a workforce strategy.
And I wanted to note too that like the independent colleges are part of this too, because it is through the Georgia Student Finance Commission. So again, it really provides a lot of options for folks kind of in the big brain.
Yeah, really good stuff. The next one's a little more administrative, but still very needed. Strategic reserves for the university and technical college systems. What this does is allows a small amount of carryover from one fiscal year to the next for the two systems. So if you think about things like, a pandemic or Hurricane Helene, or these things that had big impact on especially more than one university, there are needs that happen towards the end of a school year where you don't necessarily need or want a school to spend down to zero for what they were appropriated for the year. And they need that tiny bit to hold over in case something comes up, like some kind of change happens for the either the fiscal or the student body part of the college or university. The other piece of that too is it allows a small amount of write-off for bad debt, which I know the universities have been after for a while. So where they've been very diligently trying to collect on old debts and need to write those off, similar to how many of our businesses would do it. Next one was a big one, HB 1193. This was Speaker John Burns' primary focus for the session for education and workforce efforts, Georgia Early Literacy Act. There's a lot in there. I'm not even going to pretend to tell you everything that's in there. The one big one I will note is the literacy coaches that would be available for a lot of schools. That was a big piece of what was needed. There's a lot of administrative rework with that bill and the Early Literacy Council and a lot of other minor changes that add up to a big change for how Georgia's investing and approaching literacy across the state. Daniela?
Yeah, I just wanted to know that was one of our school bills too. I think to Tim's point, it really is a huge push in continuing the work that is going to focus the House, Senate, especially for Speaker Burns and Mrs. Dale Burns. I think it's super important, but I think it's a great piece too to continue to really keep the early learners top of mind. We know all for it having the quality early learning is for long-term success. So.
Yep, absolutely. The next one was kind of a Christmas present, something that passed both chambers last session, but there were minor changes that needed an agree at the end that just didn't happen before last year's session ran out of time. And this year it, boom, just landed and passed. So this was changes around occupational licensing, very administrative, very technical. Not even going to pretend that I know anything about that. We had a legislative expert that was guiding that through the House, that was an attorney and could explain it all. And I am not her. So what I will say for those of you who struggle, particularly with like military spouses or other folks that have moved into Georgia and are trying to get their license renewed or are facing, let's say, transparency issues as they're going through a licensing process, and just understanding how the different boards license and what their rules and regs are ahead of time, that will be pretty transformational. So pretty excited that that is happening.
I just want to double down on this because I remember testifying at the study at least like 2 to 3 years ago. So to Tim's point, it is a true Christmas present that our organization, the Metro Atlanta Chamber, have been kind of involved with the Georgia Justice Project from the very beginning. It really is a huge piece to Tim's point, especially on the transparency, because at present the current system says, if you have a criminal, charge from, writing a bad check 30 years ago, you may or may not be able to actually receive your personal license. It did not kind of provide any predictability. If we were going through this process, you had to wait, go through all of the training and the licensing for the defined. So this kind of flips the script on that and provides a lot more certainty and predictability so that you kind of get that answer at the front end of like, yes, if I wrote about check 30 years ago, but I've had no issues since then, I will be able to get that pre-clearance, which again, I think is transformational, especially when you're trying to go through all of this, you're making that investment of time and talent, sacrifices for your family. So from a workforce perspective, I think this is actually probably one of the biggest that moves through, especially for those that may have, criminal background or justice involved. So super exciting and looking forward to that.
Yep. Ditto everything Daniela just said. HB 463, this was the income tax portion or income tax legislation that did make it through. There was a lot of talk, both at pre-session and during the early part of session with the different income tax bills that were flying around. It appears this one was the compromise that that made it across. So the part that I know, again, no tax expert, but the part that I know is it creates a step down to 3.99%, down from, I think we're 4.99 now. Don't quote me on that one, but there are a set of measures and triggers for Georgia's economy that have to be met to get us down to that 3.9, but the stair step is in code and set so that as long as we meet those economic targets, then our income tax moves down to the 3.9 level.
And I think we are at 5 4.15 at present. So I think this immediately moves us down to 4.99, and then to Tim's point, moves us down to 3.99 if we get those triggers. There were a number of tax incentives that were included in this that were eliminated as of January 1st, 2026. And then the only other thing that I would note too on the tax side is that property tax was a big point of discussion this year as well. And they ended up passing SB 33, which was very different from the other proposals. So they kind of talked through the rest of the session. So these were day 40 conversations that were interesting to follow nonetheless.
Yeah, I'll just say from business perspective, there were some pretty drastic proposals at the beginning. So it was good that some sensibility prevailed to give a more compromised or more measured, I guess I should say, approach to how we look at taxes and tax credits and property tax. Okay, so before we move to more stuff, talk about bills that didn't pass, but I think should have. These are just two of my kind of perennial favorites. HB 385. This would have allowed students who had not used their Hope eligible dollars or Hope eligible credit hours by the time they finish their undergrad degree. So think about maybe dual enrollment students and those who are kind of on a fast track through their undergrad degree. But they did not technically use all of their Hope covered allotted tuition hours, that they could take the undergrad portion of those and transfer the amount to their graduate degree. Thought that was a really brilliant idea since the amount's already allocated to allow folks to do that. Representative Scott Holcomb's carried that bill a couple times. It did pass early in the session, but then kind of stalled. So hope to see that one come back. And then, of course, sports betting. When we're talking about years of income tax and property tax reduction, this is revenue that a lot of our workforce and education programs rely on. So as that's getting crunched, there have to be new sources of revenue. So that's just sort of my take on it, and maybe the Metro Chamber's take on it, that there are things like early education and Hope Scholarship that need to be protected or shored up as other sources of income get pulled down. So that's all I'll say about that. I will say there's been less attention on sports betting and casino gambling and all the other kind of forms out there. The online sports betting's been our primary focus. So I was kind of surprised to see that move earlier in the session. But then similar to the graduate Hope bill, it kind of stalled out as the session went on. Daniela, anything you want to add on things that didn't pass but should have?
No, I think this was a good list. This was, I think, just a very interesting session. So we were happy to get out with what we did and did not. I think our organization especially played a lot of defense this year. And sometimes the best thing you can do is prevent bad legislation from being enacted. So
Truth.
Election year politics are fun.
Yes, they are. Fun's a good word. Then I have kind of some B-sides. These are things that passed that either we were just watching or maybe minorly involved in. I'm not going to pretend to know what all these are. Some of them, like I said, we were kind of watching at arm's length. But one that I personally always follow is the sales tax exemption for fine arts and museums. That has to get renewed every, I think it's 5 or 6 years. So that renewal did happen this year. This is for the state portion of sales tax on those events.
And I'll add too, actually, a number of our local chamber partners from a hub perspective. So all of your non-Atlanta MSAs, so think Columbus, Macon, Savannah. That group, the Hub Chamber Council, actually took some official support positions and had their lobbyists working hard on this one, as well as the historic rehabilitation credit because it's really important work that happens in those communities. And especially we think about those museums that really add a lot to your community, and being able to have those at a more affordable rate is important for those organizations. And then, of course, we know that the historic rehabilitation is important to save a lot of those really great structures in those communities. So we were really involved with those pieces, as well as the forestry credit. I think
Yep.
that was a really a full scope business community effort to support an industry that has been hit really hard with a number of closures in the state, as well as some of those big picture global factors around how people are using wood and paper these days. So I think these are all super great and important to talk about. And I was excited too to see Tim mention the permit bill as well. That was one that we were really supportive of.
Yeah, there was a lot of things kind of housing and permitting related. This one, just from my own personal experience, was pretty practical. Just like putting some guardrails around permitting processes and how long the denial and appeal process can churn at a local level for folks who are attempting to expand or start new housing. There were a lot of interesting proposals. I was glad to see the debate happen around a lot of those, just because it's sort of overdue, the legislature to focus on housing and how the state, what role the state has in um, tackling the housing affordability issue.
Yeah, we actually have been part of a group since 2023 with the Georgia Municipal Association, Association of County Commissioners of Georgia, Georgia Realtors Association, and Home Builders of Georgia, which are not groups that always work together. But to your point exactly, Tim, housing is something we've got to kind of get under control. Um, we continue to still have a shortage, regardless if you're in a rural community, hub community, metro Atlanta. All of those challenges look a little different, but we're having those shortages everywhere. And a huge part of the supply is that we don't have enough housing. So providing some predictability around these permitting while still, balancing the needs of local governments is a great place to start. Certainly a good common sense place. And I am hopeful that we'll be able to continue to work on these because I think, 6 months of supply is what people say is healthy. We're around 3 months, so much better than the kind of like the 2 weeks that we had been in that 2022, 2023 timeframe, but still a lot of work to be done. I think the governor's workforce housing fund has been super important, especially to provide those infrastructure dollars in rural communities. But I know we continue to hear from partners that there's a need for investment in that extra support in Metro Atlanta as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, the forestry and biofuel one was an interesting one also to watch the bridge happen between kind of like city and metro for rural Georgia, between ag and aerospace. There's like all these different partners that sort of rallied around that particular tax credit. So for those of you who didn't know, the forestry industry has been kind of having a rough couple years of it. Um, and there was also this desire to expand the biofuel side of agriculture and forestry as well. So a lot of interest, particularly from our airlines, from those who rely on the refining of certain types of fuel to keep their business moving, was a big deal. So it was a fascinating set of partners at the table for that. So I was glad to see that pass. Not going to walk through everything else on here, but there's some really good movements that are happening on here. I didn't have time to put it up here. I think the Speaker of the House, John Burns, yesterday announced their blue ribbon commissions, I think they call it. So these will be the study committees that the House leadership is going to be very focused on. Maybe we can include that in a recap. I can link that press release around that came out yesterday. But there are a couple of education and/or workforce related topics in that. And with that, Amy, I will stop sharing and turn it back to you.
Awesome. Well, don't go anywhere. We've got questions. So,
All right.
first, what's B-side?
Hmm. For those of you that don't have vinyl albums, uh, so A side would have been the hit that you all know. B side is the one that is either a minor hit or is a surprise song, like something that's good, but is on the flip side of the vinyl record. So for B
It's
side,
filler. It's the
yeah,
filler
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, or filler or things maybe that weren't like top of mind for me going through session, but still were really interesting things that were happening either with the rest of our team or just happening under the Gold Dome in general.
Okay, so back to some of the bills that you mentioned on the first part, on the first slide. This one is from Corinne. Does HB 1302 or anything in the budget change anything on apprenticeships, or is it more about ensuring those programs are run through GOES?
Yeah, so Daniela, you might have to take this one. Why don't you, because you know more about the federal move or designation on that one, right? I'm
Yeah,
assuming
so
that's what we're talking about.
yeah, and it is a lot of more of that centralization. One huge issue is that we actually don't have a statewide registry of apprenticeships. There's a lot of like labor unions that have operated these as registered apprenticeship programs through the federal government. But I know when we were going through committees and process, people asked, well, how many apprentices do we have in the state? And we have no clue. No one
Yep.
knows. No one knows how many. Everyone kind of has this hodgepodge of information. Some of it's a little bit behind closed doors. And so I think, again, as we're trying to get more employers to invest in experiential learning opportunities, offer that training, having a better set of information around who's doing what, how are they doing it. So this will allow for kind of that statewide registry and that data to be collected, which is huge. And then again, a lot of those administrative pieces are going down to the states to have more of an administrative push there. I think separately, the federal government is making investments in apprenticeships. That wasn't obviously part of this bill, but having all of those resources in the state is really important so that we're able to leverage those dollars a little bit better. I think too, kind of once some of the federal money trickles down, I wouldn't be surprised if a future governor wanted to make some additional investments in apprenticeship. But for now, it's really moving and then kind of seeing how do you leverage those federal funds that should be flowing.
Yep.
And I want to add, I think if I remember correctly, that it actually designates TCSG as the domain, the overlord of apprenticeships, while the state workforce board, just the board portion of it moved to goes. The rest of the administrative elements and the people delivering the services or fund, administering the WIOA funds and Wagner Pizer funds and whatnot for the state still will be housed at TCSG. So TCSG is the home for everything apprenticeships.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that centralization is so important. So you aren't going all over the world. And I think from an administrative standpoint, they already have all those dollars. And so they can be more strategic and intentional.
Mhm. Awesome. And then Darlene Lynch has asked, she's glad to finally see medical licensing reform in SB 427, which helped experienced immigrant doctors return to practice in Georgia. Her question is, do chambers have a position on HB 295, which also passed and threatens localities with private lawsuits for failing to take a hard line on homelessness and immigration and is arguably at odds with solutions advanced by governor and business communities? It's a challenging one.
Yeah.
I don't remember us taking a position, and I'll share kind of from
Yeah.
a Georgia Chamber perspective. We take positions on bills that are brought to us that are our member companies. So if we're completely a kind of a member driven process. So if we have a member that says, hey, this is important for the full business community, that's when we kind of get involved. But we do rely on our members to, you know, engage on what issues are most important. But I don't remember that one kind of rising to the top or hearing much about it during the session.
I've got a couple more questions, if that's okay. So, from your vantage point, what was the single biggest win for Georgia's workforce and education community this session? And why does it matter to Metro Atlanta specifically?
I mean, for me, 1302 was probably one of the biggest wins. I say that because the administration funding for education and workforce is divided between a lot of state agencies. That comes down through federal grants, some through state funding. There's a lot. Uh, for the state, there's a couple ways to think about this. One is the data aggregation, right? So when you want to know for students that go through a career in tech ed pathway in K-12 and then transfer in the technical college system and then hopefully go to work, and you want to be able to understand and follow that process for the student. Having to go through three different agencies gets really confusing, and to be honest, data can get lost as you do that. So having that data centralized, having all the agencies working together in one spot, um, and also having a more what's the right term? Having somewhere to go when they have questions about high demand career lists, when they have questions about, anything the state workforce board is doing, um, makes a lot of sense that you would house that into one spot that also is aggregating the data with it. So that was a huge one for me. And then the second one is it then allows this facilitation around the career navigator, which isn't just for students. This is also for financial aid counselors. This is for school counselors. This is for parents. Anywhere that you access education as an end user. So think about like the Georgia 411, the sort of HOPE application process, whether you're talking about WorkSource Georgia, like there's a lot of different portals that we have that technically should all be talking to each other. This now allows them to a spot where they can start talking to each other. And then the last thing I'll add is from a competitiveness standpoint, if Georgia is going to compete for these large federal grants that happen around education and workforce, having our data and our point of contact into one central spot that's coordinating with multiple agencies just makes logistical sense. So rather than have to constantly talk to 5 people in 5 different agencies or offices, you have one agency that is taking the lead and running with it. So that one for us, just long term, whether it's economic development or from the just straight up K-12 education side, just makes complete sense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it was the most transformative piece of legislation and really supports top state for talent. How do we continue to really build on what we've done for the past couple of years? But to give a different perspective, I will say that 207 again was such a gift just because our organizations have been working on it for at least 3 to 4 years, and it was such a no-brainer. So just really, really excited because it affects a really important population to get back to work and for that upskilling. So a true gift.
I will agree with both of you. And I think one of the things about HB 1302 is that, yes, we've been generating data, and I have been on the end of generating data that just sits there, but housing everything under what is now goes really creates an opportunity for action to be taken on that data and to spur some change as needed. So we've got another question here from Monty. Hey, Monty. He's excited about the passing of the Career Navigator. What is the position of the chamber on how this effort should be operationalized?
So I think like my perspective, this is both personal and professional, which is you've got to make it as simple as possible for the end user, whether that's a student, parent, business person, whomever that's interacting with that future system. I will say that because it's not live right now. But if it's not easy to use and easy to navigate, the chance of people actually continuing to use it long term is pretty nil. So obviously we will advocate for something more mobile based if possible. and something that is, what's the right term? Kind of lifelong, I think is how I would think about it. Like it goes with you even as you move from education side or work source side into workforce into the actual job and then come back. Like wherever you are, it needs to stay with you. I think that's our main position and why we're both involved and excited about that entire project.
Yeah, very excited about the project. And a lot of the right players are at the table so that it is not just representative of one system, right? All the systems are at the table, and the goal is that it's useful to individuals both in the public education system or out of the public education system. Whether they've graduated or and they're looking to, move into a different area or get back into the workforce, whichever. Like it is going to be um, what from high school to the grave type of thing as it pertains to work. So I'm excited about that. Um, so Linda asks, can we introduce user friendliness to WIOA? I'm not sure if that question, Linda, is as it pertains to the Career Navigator. If it is, I will say that the Career Navigator team does include WorkSource Georgia. They are at the table. And so that is, yes, to direct people to those resources. WorkSource Georgia is also working on a few other tools that I might be aware of that make it more user friendly for people looking for training or job placement support. And then Sherry Blight asks or states, in the Career Navigator needs access for intermediary and supportive roles to help those we support. Yes, it is. I want to manage expectations. This is not a one and done type of thing. This is going to be, we build it in stages, right? So just know that the first piece is not the full all the bells and whistles, but I think the desire is definitely for all the bells and whistles. So that leads me to another question. We're in the second year of the session of the biennium, and so what do you think is going to be of Kemp's administration as it pertains to education workforce? What has the strongest and most roots that will be supported regardless of who our next governor is going forward? And then on the flip side, or the B side, Tim, what are you nervous that might not get the love and attention that it needs going forward?
Yeah, so much is going to depend on the new leadership that comes in. It's a very competitive field, it looks like, on all sides, not just with the governor's race, but all the statewide offices, particularly the ones that are open, meaning that person is no longer, there's no incumbent. So there's a little bit of nervousness around that. Just we're not exactly sure what we're going to get. Two good pieces of note, just for continuity's sake, is one is the state school superintendent is running for reelection. There, he is not moving to another office, and our Department of Labor commissioner is also staying in that role. So two very important agencies. They're going to have incumbents running rather than have an open seat. So the governor has a lot of sway on education and workforce, whether that's through the new GOES office, through appointments to the state school board, the list goes on and on and on. So much of the future policy agenda is going to be driven by that person in that office that they set up. So there will be a lot of, hand wringing and predictions happening. The truth is sometimes we just have to wait, particularly until we kind of get through that very first session of next year before we really understand what the real priorities are. So it always makes everybody nervous, but the reality is time is always our enemy on that one. We just have to wait.
Yeah, I completely agree with Tim. The only thing I would say is that Speaker John Burns is also running for reelection and will likely remain Speaker of the House. And so I think literacy will continue to be important. You've also got some good champions in the Senate with Chairman Billy Hickman. So I would say literacy is one you can probably continue to bet on being important moving forward. But yeah, we are all in the same boat of a lot of unpredictability, which is not our sweet spot.
So one final question, and then we'll wrap up. And this, Daniela, kind of touches on your comments around the impact of what's happening federally. So, given what's happening at the federal level, whether it's funding shifts, policy changes, or the broader economic climate shaping what Georgia can and can't do on workforce development, how is what's happening at the federal level kind of impacting us here?
Yeah, I think, the interesting part about this year too is that we've got those midterm elections, which I think people have also put a lot of attention and focus on. Certainly the administration is not changing this year, but having a potentially a different Congress is going to drive some changes. So I think certainly we've got an executive branch that's wanted to use the full extent of their executive authority, and we'll continue to see those pieces coming down. But I think from a big picture perspective, there's a lot of changes that we're all trying to navigate. I would also say that there's a ton of transition within the Georgia delegation. Marjorie Taylor Greene obviously resigned her seat, and they just finished the special election in that district. Congressman Barry Loudermilk announced he's not running for office again. Uh, we'll have a new first district down in the coastal regions of Savannah as well. And we've got some folks too that are running for reelection, but have also got some opposition as well. So from like a federal perspective, we're going to have a lot of education to do with those members of Congress too on what's really important, where we're seeing the big opportunities for change. So if you are a creature of habit like me, we're just going to have to grow a little bit in this next year because it's a lot of new. So we can have a support system and some, coffee meetings to help adjust, but it's going to be a lot of changes.
Kim, anything you want to add?
No.
So the one thing I want to ask is just for everybody on the call, like we, the Georgia Chamber and the Metro Atlanta Chamber kind of take the driver's seat on advocating for some of these things, especially and Georgia Justice Project. What are the things that the folks on the call can do to support elevating, especially as we get new folks that need some a better understanding of the lay of the land? How can the Max community help in kind of educating the new folks and just supporting the work that you're doing in the advocacy around education and workforce development?
I'll start first. I would say if you don't know like your state senator or state house member, please use this time to get to know them and help educate them. When they are not kind of frazzled during the legislative session, they get the most attention and really can kind of absorb that and realize what the impact is. So use this off season. I would say maybe get through May 19th. Let them get through their primaries. But after that, I would really say invest in that. Get to know those people. They are humans. They don't know everything. They have their expertise, but if we don't give them the information, I also think that, we're the state chamber. And so the more they can hear from the local folks, it really makes a difference because they know it's their constituents, the people that go to their grocery stores, their churches, their schools. And so then when we come in, we're able to kind of double down on that message. And we also, again, are tracking lots and lots of bills. So please relay, what issues are most important to you to us. So when we say, oh, HB 207 is going through, I know that the Georgia Justice Project's a great resource on this. Let's make sure they know about it. And if they want to be able to testify on committee or provide some additional background, maybe we need some additional stats on impact or who is really best served, we can do that. And I think too, again, Tim mentioned some of the blue ribbon commissions. The Senate will also have their own study committees. So we're tracking all of this and our teams are, so we can help plug you in, but we need to know what's really important to you and where your expertise is. And I really cannot say how invaluable it is for you to use this off season just to share about your organization. Like, no, you don't have to do any kind of advocacy, but just say, hey, this is my organization. This is what we do. This is how who we serve. And these are our biggest challenges. So the more time you can spend with that, and it doesn't have to be a lot, but just grabbing coffee, grabbing lunch, it's their job to serve their district. So you are not bothering them. They are doing their job when they meet with you.
Yeah, and to double down on that too, which is if you have a local chamber that you are not currently engaged with, even if you're not a member, I would say reach out. Just do that touch to let them know like you're in their community and what your priorities are and how it connects to education and workforce in your given region or given place. Um, that would be number one. The second one would be those study committees as they happen. Don't get me wrong, some of them are just fact finding, right? They're usually very open about whether they're fact finding or whether they actually intend to produce legislation. But either way, show up, be prepared, have your 5 minutes ready to say. They will take testimony from almost anyone. You usually have to just sign up and show up. So a lot of that, there's an old adage about that, right? Like things are done by people that show up or something like that. But that's legitimately true. When Daniela, I, and a few others were interested in tackling childcare, those study committees actually produced legislation and continue to produce it. So you do have to show up and participate.
Yeah, this is a long game, right? The first Blue Ribbon Commission may not be about legislation,
Mhm.
but they may learn enough that the next time it is. So, I want to thank you both. It's been good to be back with y'all. It's been good to hear the legislative update. Thank you for walking us through everything and sharing. We really appreciate it. And before I let everybody go, I want to do a couple more updates for you. If you haven't already, please fill out the annual survey. This should only take about 5 minutes. But we need you to do the survey. I'll give you another second here to click on the QR code, and then you can do the survey on the phone before you end this call. Next, we have if you joined us today and you are not a member of Max, you get to see this great kind of content regularly. We have other great content that is only open to members, so we'd love for you to join. If you have any questions, I know you can email the website and Joy or someone else from the team will get back to you. But Max is a wonderful organization and we'd love for you to join us. Next, we've got our Max Academy coming up on May 6th. So we talked about apprenticeships today, mastering apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships. So I know several of the people that are that were in the participants will be featured speakers at that event. So come see your counterparts. And then we've got our next Max Minutes on May 22nd. And finally, I want to thank our sponsors again. Obviously, we could not do this without you, so thank you for that. We appreciate it. And with that, I will let everybody go. I hope you have a wonderful, safe weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good one, everybody.